as a result of all of these things, there is a fourth reason, which is that they therefore entered and started disputing about the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and were not happy to submit. They were not happy to submit what Allah has informed us in the Quran. So therefore they began to make khawd, they began to dispute and argue and so on and so forth. And this is the very thing that Imam At-Tahawi rahimahullah, that he mentioned in this passage. Because he said, وَالتَّعَمُّقُ وَالنَّظَرُ فِي ذَلِكَ, which means to deeply start now contemplating and reflecting and looking and investigating and observing whatever else, that this is dhari'atul khidlan. This now is a means of being abandoned. You will be abandoned. And it is a sullamul hirman. It is a step ladder to being prevented and prohibited. And it is the darajatul tughyan, that it is basically again a step towards oppression. So these people, they fell into all these things that At-Tahawi actually was warning against. And we see in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. That Allah will not be asked as to what He does, but they will be asked. So we see that this ayah explains the misguidance of these people. Who are you people to start asking about the questioning and asking about the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who are you people? Allah will not be asked about what He does, but they will be asked. Surah Al-Anbiya, Surah 21, verse 23. So what these people therefore fell into is that by way of all these false principles, they are the ones who began to start asking why. Why with respect to Allah's actions? Why did Allah make this one a kafir? Why did He make this one a Muslim? Why did He make this one healthy? Why did He make this one sick? Why is this one been ill for 10, 15, 20 years? And why is this one healthy and whatever? Why? There's all these ashkans now, they're asking these questions. Lima, why? And they're trying to ask these questions. Why was this one killed in an earthquake? And why was this one saved? And why was this oppressing, tyrannical, sinful, disbelieving, mushrik, whatever, why has he got so much wealth? And why is this righteous, pious, why is he, suffering in poverty? All these questions. And the notion of justice that applies to them, or injustice. Began to ask all these questions. And so here this means that they're asking, they're questioning the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this then is the starting point of misguidance. The starting point of misguidance. And this is why the Jabariya and the Qadariya, why they went astray. And also there are some other people who just got totally confused, utterly confused, and they couldn't understand. In fact, they followed the way of Iblis, because as we mentioned, that there's also amongst the Qadariya, there are those who are called the Mushrikiyya. They are those who will argue by way of Al-Qadr, that we did what we did because you decreed that's what we did. And they will use this argument on Yawm Al-Qiyamah. They will say, if you had so willed, we would not have committed shirk, nor would have our forefathers. Allah mentions them in the Quran. So this is like an argument used. And another position is the position of Iblis. And Iblis was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first group, the Mushrikiyya, they are arguing by way of Al-Qadr as to why they didn't abide by the Sharia. Right? So Al-Qadr now is an excuse as to why we do not abide by the Sharia, because you decreed that we wouldn't. Iblis, what he did is that he was commanded. So this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now we have a legislation, a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Iblis refused. And, he said that I'm made of fire and he's made of clay. And then obviously Allah expelled him and said that you are accursed and get you down from here. And then when Iblis responded, he said, Bima aghwaytani. Bima aghwaytani. He said, because you have caused me to go astray. Because you caused me to go astray. Right? The angle from which Iblis is coming from is that this implies that there is a conflict between Ash-Shar' and Al-Qadr. That there is a conflict now between Allah commanding and Allah decreeing. Allah commanded me to prostrate, and then Allah misguided me. So this is the Iblisi way of thinking, right? And so there are some people who are affected by that way of thinking, who see a conflict between ash-shar' and al-qadar. That how can Allah command and then decree that we're not going to abide by His commands? That doesn't really make sense, right? So this led another group of people to be utterly confused about this, ash-shar' and al-qadar. And so as a result, they denied the Sharia. They said, well, we can't really be obliged to adhere by the Sharia. It's whatever we do, Allah must be pleased with it. So you can see that all of this misguidance stems from these false principles that we mentioned, and the fact that these people began to ask questions about Allah's actions, and they thought they could fathom it with their intellect, and they thought that what they see and observe of the actions of people, that analogies can be made as it relates to the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the two are not the same. The two are clearly not the same. And all of this led this obviously to these problems, and as a result they denied al-hikmah in Allah's actions and at-ta'leel in Allah's actions. Right? So because they couldn't see a wisdom, and because they couldn't see any reason, therefore they said, well, Allah doesn't do things for things. Allah doesn't do something for something. We can't ascribe that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's no hikmah, there's no ta'leel. There's no wisdom in Allah's actions, and there's no reason or justification in Allah's actions. This again is batil, because who put you in a position to be able to understand the wisdom in Allah's actions? Allah is all-knowing, Allah is all-wise, and there is a knowledge and a wisdom that belongs to Allah which no human will be able to fathom and understand. And yes, there are some things that we can understand. Obviously, there are many things that we do and that we can understand when we see things in Allah's creation, because the reason which Allah has given us does allow us within limits to know certain things. But there are things which are beyond the ability of human reason to be able to fathom. So who put you in a position? Who are you to start denying al-hikmah in Allah's actions and al-ta'leel in Allah's actions, just because you haven't found a reason or understood a reason? And we see that Shaykh gives an example, that even when we take an example of, let's say, that when we look at an intelligent individual, a smart person who has the ability to perceive and understand and know certain things, and then we have a dumb person who doesn't have the ability to know and understand and perceive things, right? So it might be the case that this dumb person, or this person who does not have a great ability, that he might start rejecting things because his aql hasn't comprehended them. But does that mean that that is the reality of the affair? And the answer is no. It's just because you haven't understood it, right? So in a similar situation here, that just because we as humans cannot understand the wisdom in the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or what takes place, then who are we to start denying the hikmah in Allah's actions or the ta'leel in Allah's actions, just because we don't fathom or understand them? And so this shows that a person who starts to employ his intellect in the issue of al-qadar, that he is the one who will be prevented. It's a stepping stone to misguidance and all the other things that were mentioned earlier on. Shaykh gives another example. He says, which is quite a good example, he says that when we look at some of the inventions that were made by the kuffar and the Christians in the Industrial Revolution, many of the machinery and things were invented, and whatever else. He said many people, when they saw certain things, like say for example a watch, or say something, whatever it might be, many people couldn't fathom and understand what is this and how is this, and they got scared of it and they began to deny it. They didn't accept that, yes. And so this reminds me of an example which is relevant here, is that in some regions of the world there are some tribes, like in South America, who have never ever had any contact whatsoever with the developed world, so to speak, right? And so I remember reading that there's a tribe that they saw by helicopter only in the Amazon jungle, who had never ever been in contact with anyone from outside of what they know from their own civilization. So what they were doing is they had spears, and they saw a helicopter. Now clearly they don't understand what a helicopter is. What on earth is a helicopter to them? And so they began to start throwing the spears and whatever else. And obviously you can see the bewildered look on their faces and whatever else. So using that example, we can apply the same thing. That to these people, what on earth is this thing? It's not like a bird that we normally see, and there's people like us inside of it. What on earth is this thing? This is something that which we can't fathom, we can't understand. It is evil, it is horrible, it is this and whatever else. And so now it's like a denial and whatever, because they can't understand, they don't know what the reality is, because the limits of their aql and their knowledge is, it only is in a certain level, because they don't have the ilm and the fahm and the enlightenment, whatever else, which the people who obviously who built those things, that they actually have that knowledge, whatever else. So in a similar way, that when we apply this issue to al-qadar, then we, as creatures of knowledge, we've been given very little, and this is because our perception, our idrak, our perception is very little, and we are not in a position to understand the wisdom, the hikmah and the ta'leel in Allah's actions and whatever takes place around us. And having said that, it doesn't mean that we cannot understand. We can understand to a certain degree. This is why the alim, the scholar, who understands all of these affairs and knows them, that he can understand many of the things that happen and take place around us in the creation. There is no problem with the alim from Ahlul Sunnah who understands, who knows the topic of Al-Qadr, and who doesn't have any issues. But there may be another person who's not an alim, who's not well grounded, and the average common person, certain doubts might come to his mind when he sees certain things. And that's because he's not grounded and he's not, firmly rooted and whatever else. So this does not mean that we cannot understand Al-Qadr and we cannot see Al-Hikmah wa Ta'leen in Allah's actions. We can. And this comes down to having the right understanding and knowledge, but still that knowledge has a limit. There are things outside of which we simply, us as humans as a whole, that we cannot understand as it relates to Allah's actions and the hikmah and ta'leel behind Allah's actions. So what we've been through here is that these are the 4 reasons, these are the 4 major causes as to why these people went astray. We'll summarize them once more. Number 1, they made an analogy between Allah's actions and the actions of the servants. Number 2, that they did not distinguish between the irada shar'iyya and the irada kawniyya, and they lumped everything together into a single thing. Allah's will, Allah's irada, that which Allah is pleased with, that which Allah loves, and this led to certain evil consequences, depending on which group that we are speaking of, the Qadariyya or the Jabariyya. Thirdly, that they entered the issue of at-tahseen wa at-taqbih of the aql, meaning the aql applying labels of yes, this is good, yes, this is evil, like this is what the kuffar do. Like they try to label everything according to their standards as being, yes, rationally this seems evil. Yes, rationally it is oppression to, a man can have 4 wives. Right, so this now is label of evil. Yeah, and whatever else, promiscuity, yes, label of al-hasan, whatever. Right, so this is aql now, using aql to apply the labels of al-hasan wal-qabih to things, to human actions. Right, and so what they did, these people who went astray, is that they used the same thing. They thought reason could apply the same labels to the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and thereby decide, yes, well actually no, this therefore is not an action of Allah, because to the reason it is actually qabih. So this can't be an action of Allah. Right? So this is the third major reason why they went astray. And the fourth major reason why they went astray, which really is a summary of the previous 3, is that they began to speculate and enter into the actions of Allah and start asking lima, why, kaif, how, and they began to ask all these questions. And so all of this is the reason and the cause of misguidance of these people. So this brings us to a line of poetry which kind of really summarizes everything. And this poetry is from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, and he said, وَأَصْلُ ضَلَالِ الْخَلْقِ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ that the foundation of misguidance in every sect, meaning every sect of the Qadariyah, وَأَصْلُ ضَلَالِ الْخَلْقِ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ هُوَ الْخَوْضُ فِي فِعْلِ الْإِلَهِ بِإِلَّةٍ, is that the foundation of misguidance of every sect is to start delving and pondering and entering into the action of Allah, the action of Al-Ilah, Allah, and trying to find a cause, trying to find the illah for it, or what is the illah, or whether, to try and explain from their own selves as to the reason why is this taking place or why is that taking place. Right? Now they started to enter into that. Then he says, فَإِنَّهُمُ لَمْ يَفْهَمُوا حِكْمَةً لَهُ فَصَارُوا عَلَى نَوْءٍ مِّنَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. For indeed they did not understand any wisdom for that action of Al-Ilah. They couldn't see what is the wisdom behind this action of Allah. And so therefore they entered, or they became upon a type of Jahiliyyah. They fell into a type of Jahiliyyah as a result of that. Right? So he says, Ibn Taymiyyah kind of summarizes the asl, or the foundation of the misguidance of all of the sects of the Qadariyah and the Jabariyah. Okay, now what the Shaykh does is he goes into look at all of the groups of the Qadariyah. There are 4 groups altogether. In fact, the extremists of the Qadariyah and the extremists of the Jabariyah, and then those who are the moderate amongst the Qadariyah, the moderate amongst the Jabariyah. So what we'll do, because it's not really no point starting this because it requires a long time, maybe a lesson in itself. So what we'll do, inshallah ta'ala, today is we'll close our topic here today, and we'll continue with this, inshallah ta'ala, next week. But it's important to understand that when we look at these topics, we have to really be upon basira as to what is it that made a person become misguided. We have to get to the crux. What is the actual underlying crux? What's going through his mind? What went through his mind? Because a lot of the times we look at these topics of as-sifat, al-qadar, al-iman, and we know the right things to say. We know that iman is qawlun wa amalun yazidu wa yanqus, and we know the sifat, that we affirm for Allah what He affirmed for Himself and whatever else. And then we know the groups, but we don't really fathom and understand where are these people coming from. What is the origin of their misguidance? What is the crux of their misguidance? What's going through their minds when they are saying what they are saying? And how and why are they wrong? And so this is a crucial topic, a crucial aspect here for us to understand all of these underlying issues, why these people went astray. Because from that we can recognize these ways of thinking in people who might have the same shubuhat and the same misconceptions, and therefore address them accordingly. So with that we conclude today's lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala ashabihi ajma'een.